Imagine this. Every couple planning to marry must, by law, sign a prenuptial agreement. It's not an option, not something only the wealthy consider. It's a legal requirement. Before the vows, before the cake, before the honeymoon, there's paperwork. Binding, structured, and sometimes uncomfortable paperwork. But what if that discomfort could prevent years of heartbreak? Welcome to the Verdict Diaries, where real stories and hypothetical legal debates reveal truths about relationships, justice, and everything in between. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a daily story or powerful discussion that might just change how you view the law and love. Today, we dive deep into a world where prenups are mandatory. And before you roll your eyes or imagine cold, heartless contracts killing romance, pause for a moment, because this isn't just about protecting assets, it's about communication, transparency, and preparing for all outcomes, not just the happily ever after. To understand how this might work, let's first define what a prenup actually is. A prenuptial agreement is a legal contract signed before marriage, detailing how assets, debts, and responsibilities will be handled in the event of divorce, death, or other major life events. It can include property division, spousal support, and even provisions related to future earnings or inheritances. Currently, prenups are optional and mostly associated with the rich and famous. But what if every couple, regardless of wealth, had to face these questions before marriage? Would that make marriages stronger, or introduce fear and mistrust into the foundation of a lifelong commitment? Let's follow the story of Emma and Rayhan, a fictional but deeply relatable couple who live in a society where prenups are required by law. Emma, a school teacher, and Rayhan, a freelance graphic designer, had been dating for 4 years. When they decided to get married, they were informed by the city clerk that a signed prenuptial agreement was required before issuing a marriage license. At first, they were surprised. Wasn't this something only celebrities did? What did they have to protect? But the law was the law. So, they scheduled an appointment with a mediator, a neutral legal consultant provided by the government, to draft their prenup. That session turned into something much more profound than either of them expected. They talked about their student debts. Emma had significant loans, Rayhan didn't. They discussed savings, spending habits, family obligations, and future dreams. Emma wanted to buy a home someday. Rayhan dreamed of traveling full-time. What would happen if one of them took time off work to raise children? Who would pay the bills? What about inheritance from Rayhan's grandfather's land? These were questions they'd never asked each other, not because they were hiding anything, but because people just don't talk about them when they're high on love. The prenup process, originally seen as a legal hurdle, became a mirror. It reflected not only their financial realities, but their communication style, conflict resolution ability, and how deeply they trusted each other. And that's the catch. Prenups aren't about preparing for failure. They're about understanding what success looks like together. In a world where prenups are mandatory, couples are forced to talk about the hard stuff up front. And while it might not be romantic, it could prevent the pain of future surprises. Emma and Rayhan discovered, through that process, that they needed to delay the wedding, not because they didn't love each other, but because they needed to realign their expectations. Now let's shift the perspective. Some critics argue that mandatory prenups would commodify relationships, turning love into a transaction. And that's a valid concern. Imagine two people madly in love being told to divide their future like a pie chart. It might seem cold, bureaucratic, even cynical. But is it really? Think about all the marriages that end in messy, expensive divorces. What if clear terms had already been agreed upon when everyone was calm, in love, and thinking clearly? Lawyers report that divorce proceedings often turn ugly not because of the separation itself, but because of the financial battles that follow. When people are hurt, they weaponize money. They fight over houses, cars, savings, even pets. Mandatory prenups could remove that ammunition before the fight even begins. Emma and Rehan's story continued. After 3 months of working through their prenup draft, they finally got married. But something had changed. Their bond was stronger, they'd had the uncomfortable conversations, and survived. They now knew how to talk about money without yelling, how to listen without assuming the worst, and how to prepare for both sunshine and storm. In this fictional world, divorce still happens, but it's no longer a war. It's a structured process. As the debate around mandatory prenuptial agreements grows, one key factor emerges: culture. Different societies hold deeply rooted beliefs about marriage, family roles, and the sanctity of romantic commitment. And in many places, bringing legal contracts into the equation before a wedding can feel offensive, even taboo. But let's imagine how countries around the world might respond if this became an international trend. What if global governments, one by one, began passing laws requiring prenups as a standard part of marriage? In Western countries like the United States, where individual rights and financial independence are emphasized, the shift might be easier. Couples might initially resist, but over time, mandatory prenups would be seen as just another step, like filing taxes or getting a driver's license. Educational campaigns would likely normalize the process, perhaps even integrating prenup training into premarital counseling or school curriculum. However, in cultures where family is deeply intertwined in financial decisions, such as in South Asia or the Middle East, the reaction might be more complex. In some societies, marriages are not just between two individuals, but two families. Wealth is shared, not separated. Introducing contracts might be seen as a sign of distrust, or even an insult to tradition. But there's also a flip side. In places where women often face financial inequality or lack of legal protection during divorce, mandatory prenups could become a tool of empowerment. Women could negotiate terms that protect them in the event of abuse, abandonment, or financial manipulation. Prenups, in that sense, could be life-saving documents. Let's return to our fictional couple, Emma and Rehan. After navigating their prenup journey, they're invited to speak at a local relationship seminar about their experience. What surprises them is the diversity in the audience. Older couples, young couples, even people who've been divorced, all eager to learn more. During the Q&A session, a man named Carlos shares that in his home country, divorces are so stigmatized that people stay in unhappy marriages for decades. A woman named Aisha talks about how her mother lost everything in a divorce because she had no legal knowledge and no prenup. Suddenly, the room shifts. The conversation isn't about laws, it's about life, about how many people are hurt by silence, by assumptions, and by lack of preparation. The idea of a prenup transforms from a legal tool to a life skill. But still, critics argue that mandating prenups removes choice. Isn't the freedom to love and marry without legal intrusion part of what makes marriage special? It's a fair point. Mandatory anything can feel oppressive. So perhaps the key lies in balance, not just requiring prenups, but designing the process to foster fairness, dialogue, and equality. Imagine a system where the prenup isn't just a contract written by lawyers. It's a guided conversation, facilitated by counselors, mediators, and financial educators. Couples would be encouraged to express fears, hopes, and boundaries. It wouldn't be about division, it would be about vision. In fact, in this fictional world, governments might offer tax incentives for couples who complete a structured prenup process. Employers might offer financial wellness programs that include prenup planning. Schools could introduce relationship law as part of life skills education. The concept of love would be elevated, not reduced, by knowledge. Rehan, once skeptical about the whole process, begins to see how the prenup actually deepened his love for Emma. He understood her better, respected her more, and felt less anxious about the unknown. It wasn't a wall between them, it was a foundation under them. Of course, not all stories go that smoothly. Across the world, legal systems would face challenges. What if one partner refuses to sign? What if someone feels pressured or manipulated during the process? What about couples from different countries? How would international prenups be enforced? Lawmakers would need to develop safeguards to protect against abuse and coercion. Lawyers, mediators, and judges would be trained to identify red flags. And perhaps most importantly, the public would need to be educated. Because any legal change, no matter how well intended, can backfire if people don't understand it. There would be protests, headlines, and heated debates on television. Some would call it a violation of love. Others would see it as the evolution of marriage. But the most powerful voices might come from those whose lives were protected by these agreements. Women who walked away from abusive marriages with financial security. Men who discovered hidden debts before marriage and chose to pause, reflect, and heal. Families who avoided years of bitter court battles because everything had already been discussed, agreed, and written down. As the movement spreads, a new culture of intentional relationships. As society begins to embrace the concept of mandatory prenups, we begin to witness its ripple effects across generations. Marriage, once entered with romantic ideals and minimal preparation, is now viewed with a new lens, one that demands both emotional and legal maturity. The change doesn't happen overnight, but slowly, traditions start evolving. The wedding industry adjusts first. Venues, planners, and even florists begin offering prenup packages, combining legal consultations with marriage prep services. Relationship influencers post videos not just about engagement rings or proposal ideas, but also about financial transparency, shared goals, and building joint visions. Celebrities who once flaunted lavish weddings now talk openly about how their prenup conversations made their relationships stronger. In this new world, divorce doesn't automatically mean destruction. Because of clear financial boundaries and shared agreements, separations become less about vengeance and more about resolution. Children, once caught in the crossfire of messy divorces, benefit from parents who are less financially entangled and more emotionally prepared. Courtrooms, too, see a transformation. The caseload of bitter property disputes shrinks. Family law attorneys focus more on mediation and less on battle. And judges, once burdened with interpreting vague marital agreements, find clarity in standardized prenup structures. It's not perfect, but it's a dramatic improvement. And what about those who choose not to marry? Interestingly, with the rise of mandatory prenups, many couples pause and ask, is marriage still the right step? In this world, cohabitation agreements rise in popularity. Domestic partnerships gain more legal recognition. Some people, realizing they're not ready to make long-term commitments involving legal obligations, delay marriage, choosing instead to work on themselves, their finances, or their communication. And that, in itself, becomes a cultural victory. Fewer impulsive marriages mean fewer impulsive divorces. The institution of marriage doesn't weaken. It becomes more intentional. Let's revisit Emma and Rehan. A year into their marriage, they revisit their prenup voluntarily, not out of necessity, but out of growth. Their careers have shifted, their dreams have evolved, and they want their agreement to reflect that. In this new system, prenups aren't set in stone. They're living documents that couples can adjust as their relationship matures. This ongoing dialogue strengthens their bond. They laugh about the initial awkwardness they felt during the first prenup conversation, now recognizing it as a pivotal moment in building their trust. Emma says, "We didn't just plan our wedding, we planned our future." Rehan adds, "And we did it together." Meanwhile, policymakers observe trends with growing interest. Data shows a decrease in contentious divorces. Mental health among divorced individuals improves. Financial recovery post-divorce becomes quicker, especially for women who were previously left in economic uncertainty. But the most profound shift isn't in courtrooms or tax forms, it's in how people define love. In the past, love was often idealized as unconditional, spontaneous. The final phase of this exploration begins not in a courtroom, but in a quiet living room, where Emma and Rehan are recording the latest episode of their podcast. Their guest is a retired judge who had once presided over some of the country's most publicized divorce cases. She smiles as she recalls the days before mandatory prenups became the norm. Back then, we weren't just resolving legal matters, we were cleaning up emotional catastrophes. The courtroom was often where heartbreak met chaos. Now, she says, things are different. There's a framework, a blueprint. People are more informed, more prepared, and most importantly, more respectful of the emotional and financial boundaries that relationships need. So, has love changed? Yes, but perhaps not in the way skeptics feared. Instead of weakening the bonds of marriage, mandatory prenups have added a layer of resilience. They've created space for truth-telling early on, for clarity before crisis. Couples are no longer walking blindfolded into legal partnerships. They're holding hands and maps. Emma and Rehan read letters from listeners. One woman writes, "My partner and I had the prenup conversation on our third date. It was awkward, sure, but it was also honest. That night, I knew I could trust him." Another message reads, "Thanks to your show, I helped my sister walk away from a relationship where she was being financially controlled. Now she's building her independence." These stories reveal that beyond the legal jargon and paperwork, this shift has created something deeper, a culture of accountability and equality. In workplaces, companies begin offering free legal workshops for employees considering marriage. In universities, law and psychology departments collaborate on courses exploring the emotional and legal dimensions of modern relationships. Artists and filmmakers produce stories that reflect this new reality. Romantic comedies where prenups are not the joke, but the turning point. But not everyone embraces the change. There are still loud voices who say this approach sterilizes love. That real romance shouldn't need rules. That if you're planning for the end, maybe you shouldn't be starting at all. Yet, as more people speak openly, another truth emerges. Planning for all possibilities isn't planning for failure, it's planning with wisdom. Take Javier and Priya, for example. Married under the new mandatory prenup law, they decided to take it a step further. They created a love clause where they promised to revisit their goals every year on their anniversary. They even built in mutual commitments, therapy when needed, shared savings goals, co-parenting principles, even if they never had children. And when they eventually faced hardship, job loss, a health scare, relocation stress, they leaned on that structure. It didn't solve every problem, but it gave them ground to stand on. A framework for returning to empathy when the world tried to pull them apart. That's what mandatory prenups have done. They've changed the culture from reactive to proactive. Of course, loopholes still exist. Some people try to game the system. Some manipulate the terms. No policy is perfect, but the shift in collective awareness is undeniable. More people now understand that protecting one's financial rights is not a betrayal of love. It's a promise to enter into something with eyes open, with fairness at the center. It's no longer taboo to talk about money, about goals, about personal boundaries. These conversations are becoming part of the foundation